The sky above the old county fairgrounds looked bruised and tired, streaked with the dusty gold of a fading afternoon, when the final call echoed across the nearly empty auction yard. At that moment, with 3 hesitant bidders and one property that nobody seemed to want, a man named Mason Hart lifted his hand and bought a ranch that had been declared hopeless, bankrupted, abandoned, and forgotten by everyone except the ghosts of its past. What he didn't know was that, just hours later, dozens of black-tinted SUVs would crawl out of the night, surrounding the ranch with flashing lights and federal agents yelling for him to step outside with his hands where they could see them. And in the breath between the last strike of the gavel and the sudden roar of police commands, Mason's life would shift in a way he never imagined. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories where broken people find their way back to life, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel name to help support more inspiring stories like this one. Mason had not driven toward the auction with plans to buy a ranch or anything close to it. In fact, he had woken that morning with a weight in his chest that never seemed to leave. The past 2 years had hollowed him out, losing his father, losing his job in the city, and losing the woman who decided she was done trying to rebuild him. He had come home to the countryside looking for a pause, not a purpose. The auction was supposed to be nothing more than a distraction, something to keep him from sitting alone in his childhood bedroom wondering how a grown man could feel so directionless. But when the auctioneer announced the rundown Silverthorne Ranch, a once thriving, now deteriorated property whose fences leaned like old men and whose barn roof sagged under decades of rain, the crowd went quiet. Something about the ranch spoke to him, some strange mix of sorrow and resilience that mirrored what lived inside him. And before he could question the impulse, he raised his hand and became the owner of what others pitted as a liability. Driving through the rusted entrance gate felt like stepping into a forgotten chapter of a book. Weeds swayed over cracked concrete, the main house was cloaked in shadows, and every window seemed to hold its breath. Mason walked the property slowly, feeling the wind stir dust along the porch boards and listening to the eerie hush that settles on land when it's been unloved for too long. But beneath all that ruin, he sensed something still alive, something waiting. The ranch wasn't dead, it was simply wounded. And for the first time in years, Mason felt the faint spark of purpose flicker inside his chest. He didn't know if he could repair the place. He didn't know if he could repair himself. But standing there in the dusk, he believed maybe he could try. He cleaned for hours, sweeping out the porch, airing out rooms, removing the broken furniture left behind by previous owners. The sun slipped below the hills, and a cool quiet settled across the land, accompanied by the soft cracking of old wood adjusting to night. Exhausted but content, Mason stepped outside to breathe the crisp air. He imagined what the ranch might look like if it were restored, children running across the pasture, horses grazing under the wide-open sky, laughter echoing off the barn walls. The dream felt fragile but beautiful, and he held onto it like a lifeline. But that quiet, so tender and rare, didn't last. In the dead of night, long after Mason had drifted into sleep on an old sofa, a distant rumble shook the windows. He jolted awake as bright white beams swept across the front wall. Another rumble followed. Then another. Slowly, the isolated ranch lit up like a stage under harsh spotlights. Mason rushed to the window and froze. Rows of federal vehicles stretched across the front fields, their doors swinging open as agents armed with flashlights and gear fanned out across his property. His heart thundered. He'd done nothing wrong, nothing questionable. And yet the world outside looked like a scene from a crime film. When the bullhorn crackled and ordered him to step onto the porch with his hands visible, Mason felt confusion twist into fear. With trembling hands and a voice hoarse with disbelief, he complied. The agents surrounded him, their stern faces unreadable in the glare of headlights. They demanded his name, his identification, how long he'd been on the ranch, whether he had moved or touched anything inside. They searched the property, the barn, the fields. They combed through every inch of land as if hunting for something buried beneath the soil. When they finally emerged from the barn with grim expressions, Mason's confusion seemed to vibrate in the air. The lead agent explained only that the ranch had been under surveillance for months. The previous owner had been connected to a federal investigation involving missing property, financial fraud, and rumors, still unverified, about something hidden on the land that could implicate multiple people. Mason felt his throat tighten. He had bought a mistake. A dangerous mistake. The agents did not arrest him, they had no reason to, but they warned him that the ranch would remain under federal observation until the investigation closed. And at the end of that long, exhausting night, when the agents finally drove away, Mason remained alone in the silence of the battered porch with nothing but the echo of fear and a property tangled in someone else's secrets. Over the next days, the weight of that night crushed him. Every creak of the house startled him. Every distant engine sounded suspicious. He couldn't shake the paranoia that agents might return at any moment, or worse, that whoever the government was investigating might show up first. But leaving wasn't an option, not for a man who had already lost everything. Instead, he threw himself into repairing what he could. He patched walls, cleaned debris, fixed broken steps, and cleared the barn of tools and rusted machinery. Each small victory softened the dread inside him. The land seemed to respond too, the wind grew gentler, the light warmer, the nights quieter. For the first time in years, Mason woke with purpose, even if danger still lurked in the unknown. Then one morning, while clearing a collapsed section of the barn, he discovered something peculiar, a set of freshly disturbed floorboards, hidden beneath hay that didn't match the rest of the older layers. Beneath them lay a wooden chest, sealed, heavy, and clearly placed there not long before the auction. Mason's breath caught. Was this what the agents were looking for? Was this the evidence they needed? Fear told him to walk away. Conscience told him to open it. But integrity, the same quality his father had praised him for since childhood, pushed him to do what he knew was right. He contacted the nearest federal office and reported the discovery. The agents returned swiftly, this time with a sense of urgency. They opened the chest in front of him and uncovered documents, ledgers, photos, maps, and coded materials that pieced together a fraud network spanning several counties. The evidence was stronger than anything they'd found before. And the fact that Mason had reported it willingly changed everything. The tension between Mason and the agents shifted. Suspicion melted into respect. The lead agent, who had been curt and cold during their first encounter, took Mason aside and apologized for the intensity of that night. They explained that they had feared losing crucial evidence and that time had been running out. Mason listened, still shaken but now understood the larger picture. He had walked unknowingly into a storm that began long before he arrived. But by choosing honesty over fear, he had helped bring it to a close. When the case officially ended weeks later, Mason expected the agents to disappear and the ranch to return to silence. But something else happened. People from town began visiting, not out of curiosity about the investigation, but because word had spread about the man who bought a ruined ranch, faced a terrifying night, and still chose to rebuild. Volunteers offered help. Local carpenters donated time. A retired veterinarian offered to check the old stable once Mason decided to bring animals onto the land. Kindness rippled through the community like sunlight breaking through fog. And as the ranch slowly transformed, so did Mason. The man who once arrived feeling empty now woke each morning with determination, hope, and a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. His bruised spirit mended alongside the weathered fences and the creaking barn doors. In restoring the ranch, he restored himself. Months later, when the ranch finally stood tall again, reborn from ruin, Mason stood at the gate during sunset and felt the quiet truth settle in his heart. He hadn't saved the ranch. The ranch had saved him.